Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey, this is Jessa. Welcome back for another episode of the Better Sex Podcast. Thank you for choosing to be here and spend some time with me, and I hope that I'm making it worth your while. I would love it if you could be interested, entertained, inspired, and ultimately helped somewhere along the line, whether you have struggles now where this stuff is relevant or someday in the future you'll remember that, wait, there was this podcast. I hope I'm making a difference. And anyway, I'm really glad you're here. Today's topic, okay, it's a couple of different things. I am talking to an adult performer, a porn star, basically, who has developed a whole, I don't want to call it a side business, but really it's a whole side passion creating educational videos that are still hardcore and explicit, but specifically educational and inclusive and sex positive. So Jessica Drake is my guest today, and we do talk a little bit about the adult film industry and the ethics of that and how she got into it and where her passion comes from and stuff like that. But then we really focus on her educational video series, The Wicked Guide to Sex, which, man, there's some really great resources that she has put together and some really great ones she is going to put together in the future. I'm really excited to learn about this resource. I did not know about the video series before talking to her. So I hope you find it interesting, and maybe you're going to find some of these videos to be really, really useful in your own sexual relationship or your sex life. So hope you enjoy it. The Better Sex Podcast is brought to you by the Sex Without Stress online course. It's a course for couples to escape the cycle of disappointment, avoidance, and pressure in your sex life. So if you're in a pretty good relationship, there's a lot of love and goodwill, but sex is your struggle, this could be for you. You work in the privacy of your own home and at your own pace to create a sex life you can both look forward to. If you want to learn more, go to sexwithoutstress.com/program. So Jessica, thanks so much for being with me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So tell me, let's start a little bit with just your background, who you are, why you're passionate about these topics.
That is a great question. I have been in the adult industry for 20 years now. This year is my 20th anniversary. And when I came in, initially it was to be a performer. And I very quickly realized that, like many other things in my life, the more I have actively to do with those things like creative control and things like that, the happier I am and the more I'm into it. So that sort of carried on to being in the business. And I always wanted to focus on all of the other things. Like I took acting lessons, figured if I'm going to do this and do feature movies being the movies with acting, more dialogue, bigger budgets, okay, more location, that I would really build on that and figure out what I'm doing. And a lot of people have this notion that adult performers have it very easy, that we just show up, have sex with everyone or anyone and go home. But it's really not like that at all. So I signed a contract with Wicked Pictures, and I'm still with them today as a performer, writer, director, and now I'm also the resident sex educator for Wicked Sensual Care. And initially, when I was just a performer with Wicked, I shot maybe 6 or 7 feature movies a year. All of my massive awards have come from big movies that I've done for Wicked. I've won AVN's Best Actress 3 times. I've won it from all the other organizations as well. I've pretty much won every sex award. And then I came to a point in my career, it was a really interesting time for the industry because not only was our business being tremendously affected by piracy, but the demographic of the people who were watching our movies either changed or we didn't exactly have it right to begin with. And what I mean by that is, I came from thinking that I have a primarily male fan base when the reality was lots and lots of couples, a lot of women. And so at a certain time, they began to come to me for sex advice. And this happened probably 10 or 11 years ago. And it just changed everything for me because I would do an appearance at an adult store and people would come up to me asking me what I considered to be some very basic sex ed questions. And it sort of had me questioning, well, why don't we know these things as adults in the United States? And of course, that led to bigger discussions about the lack of comprehensive sex education,
right?
Abstinence-only education being so incredibly problematic, people not being able to navigate something that they might see when they watch porn. They may not understand the negotiation and consent discussions that go on behind the scenes, or they see a polished, finished product. So
right.
Sometimes we're emulating what we see when we watch porn because we don't have the basic sex education. So it's a big conundrum. So in 2011, I started a line of educational movies called Jessica Drake's Guide to Wicked Sex. And I did that because people kept asking me questions and I was being booked to do like blowjob workshops or, like a foreplay workshop or something like that. And then I went through several educational programs to be certified as an educator, which I still do on a regular basis. Like it's ever changing and we don't know what we know until we spend the time to really grow and learn it. So throughout the series, I definitely see periods of time where I understand things way better. In the beginning of the series, I sort of gendered them more than I would.
Right. There's an evolution that has happened over the work. Yeah,
and we just don't know until we know. So doing the educationals is something that I'm really passionate about. I also do a lot of public speaking. I speak at universities. I did a human sexuality class at UCLA for a professor, and I continue to do events in retail spaces for people, all people that are 18 or over. And, the educational part of what I do has just gotten to be so important. And although I am still an active performer, I'm super passionate about helping people and helping them be more self-aware sexually. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell right now.
So it does make me wonder about what drew you to the adult industry in the first place. And did you come in with all that sort of sex positive education? Were you armed with that all as you started in this industry, or is this something that's evolved only because of that work?
Well, I think it's probably a combination of both. I came into the industry not at 18 or 19, as some performers do, but I actually came into the industry a little bit later, and I had a few years of college. I was living in Texas, and I was dancing, and I was doing some other things, and I ended up meeting some people that lived out here and were very active in the industry. And they always said, hey, you should come out to California and do magazines or do movies or whatever. And initially when I met them, I was like, yeah, no, that's just not for me. And then I became friends with them and I actually came out to LA and visited them. And it was all sort of a matter of timing. I mean, for me, school got really hard. Back then I was single and very self-sufficient. And it was tough to go to school, work at night. My interests were sort of elsewhere. I wanted to leave El Paso where I was living. And so initially I would come out here for 2 weeks and then go back home. And I would do magazines, like very, very softcore, only by myself, a little nudity. I would do some HBO and Cinemax stuff, some stuff for Showtime, like Bikini Girl #4 in the
You're
background.
right. Yeah.
But never an aspiring actress by any means, just because these things had presented themselves to me and I was really fascinated about it. And then for me, I think a really pivotal moment was when the people that I had met in Texas who lived out here took me onto the set of a movie. And when they did that, they sort of made me the production assistant. So
Mm.
I gave condoms out to the performers and I handed them lube when they needed it, water, towels, that sort of thing. And it struck me, oh my gosh, like this is completely not what I thought it was going to be. I also really fell in love with the process, both creatively, erotically, the ability that people have to express themselves on camera in a mostly very controlled environment. And so the next time they asked me, I think they were sort of joking with me at the time. And I was like, yeah, I want to do it. Like, let's make a movie. And they were like, hold on. Are you sure? And so for me, the benefit that I got by having such a great group of people was that they told me very straightforward, like very upfront, that if I choose to do movies, that it is a decision that will always come back on me and that it
Mm.
will inevitably influence what people think about me in a massive way, because sex workers, adult performers, dancers, we are so incredibly stigmatized and so shamed for our sexuality. But I went into it with my eyes open. I made a very, very conscious decision about what I wanted to do. I did it. And here I am,
Right.
and I'm super happy with every decision that I made along the way. I've always been very in control of my career. Wicked Pictures, they started in 93. I didn't sign with them until I think it was like 2004, I believe, maybe 5. And they're a condom only company. Like I don't work without condoms. Everyone is tested every 14 days.
Yeah.
Like, and that's an industry standard, the testing
Right.
protocol that I think a lot of people aren't aware of. But, I came in maybe not with such a unique story, but I did come in under some really awesome conditions. And
Yeah.
I've been really, really fortunate. I've worked really hard. I say I'm super lucky, right? Because I know where I came from. But at the same time, I think it's luck plus opportunity plus hard work. And it's still something that I work at very hard today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have, this is just occurring to me listening to you, and I think about some of the conversations that I get into or the questions that I get asked sometimes. What would you say about the ethics of pornography? Because I think people have concerns around potentially who's performing in these films, who's in the industry. Are people empowered? Are they making a choice? Are they there by their own decision? Are they being forced or coerced or drugged? I think that's part of what concerns people with maybe watching porn. Am I somehow participating in an industry that's, taking advantage of people?
Yeah, I think that it's really easy for people to be very condescending about an industry that they don't know anything about.
Mm-hmm.
And when you couple that with the impression that, particularly the media, they're really guilty of this. They want to sensationalize anything. And things like words like trafficking and coercion
Yeah.
are very much buzzwords, especially now in the Me Too era. And I think that people are looking for a lack of agency or unethical practices in this industry. And I will say that obviously I can only speak from my own lived experience as a performer, but I've also been in this industry for 20 years. So
Mm-hmm.
I've known a lot of people and I've directed a lot of people. I've worked with a lot of people. And in my time in the industry, I have not seen anyone coerced or pressured into doing porn. This is not an industry where trafficking is welcome at all. It is not set up for anything like that. Our performers in the entire industry, not just at Wicked Pictures, but in the entire industry, are responsible for filling out paperwork, saying that they are who they say they are. They have legal documentation. We sign codes of conduct on set. If any of us observed a situation like that, it just wouldn't be tolerable in our industry.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think I think that some of the more, and sometimes it's the religious fanatics, sometimes it's the anti-sex work feminists, and sometimes it's just people that have a hard time understanding and accepting their own sexuality. So they need to demonize our industry in some way. That being said, we know that there have been times in the industry where a performer's consent was violated, or a performer didn't feel comfortable speaking up, or something like that. And I think that the important thing is we hold the people who violate things like that, we hold them accountable. So I think the accountability process is very important, and not just in porn, but in any industry, right?
Yeah.
We have the whole movement in Hollywood with Harvey Weinstein, and all of the other men that were taking advantage of people, And I think that because porn is an industry that most people aren't capable of understanding because they don't have the lived experience, or because they would rather read an anti-porn PSA or watch a video, right? I just think that creates a lot of misinformation and confusion. And I encourage viewers that are concerned with ethical porn creation or ethical porn viewing habits, just familiarize yourself with companies and with performers. And one of the greatest things about social media today is that, you can pretty much follow your favorite performers in real time.
Right.
And we're not going to promote companies that are taking advantage of us. We're not going to miss the opportunity to call someone out for a violation, know? So I think when people think those things, it's definitely based on a lack of information.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I think when you said some people need to feel badly about the industry, I think that's true. But I think for a lot of people, they just don't have access to the information about what's actually happening. Where does this stuff come from, right?
Yeah,
I think it's, that's why I think it's such an important conversation.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, sometimes also what I do when people talk to me in that way is I ask them, when they generalize about the industry, whether it's, all performers were abused, or everyone does drugs and drinks, or we all just have big orgies all the time with everyone, or whatever. I ask them, well, how do you know that?
Yeah.
Like, where did you hear that? Or how many performers do you know? Or when's the last time you watched a movie? What was it? And usually they can't even say. They're like, well, I heard, or I read, or whatever, and it sort of takes the air out of their sails.
Are those some of the most common misconceptions, that everybody was abused? You're having
definitely
orgies all the time, or you're drugged out?
That's pretty much the gamut. And I think that as they're realizing that adult performers are people, and we're sort of putting real people to the on-screen personas, I think the general public is becoming much more aware.
Yeah. So if you wouldn't mind, speak a little bit to your thoughts about sex workers' rights, because you're right. Adult performers, sex workers are stigmatized. Some things are illegal, right? Like what do you want to see happen around rights and awareness?
Well, I think decriminalization is really important for sex workers. And I think that, and this could actually be a whole nother episode of your show. So this part I'll try to keep brief so we can cover some more ground. But it's not sex work that is the problem. The problem is the way society treats sex workers. And sex worker rights should be basic human rights, right? We should be recognized as valuable individuals that are deserving of rights, deserving of legal protection. And what we have instead is a really unbalanced system where people are able to pass legislation that directly affects us and endangers not just our jobs, but our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing it under the guise of maybe preventing trafficking. That's a buzzword, right?
Right.
Helping these poor people in porn. But what's actually happening is like super harmful legislation is being passed without our involvement.
Yeah.
So I think a great way to illustrate that briefly would be, I was in my own neighborhood at a grocery store when I was approached by someone that was carrying a clipboard and asked me to sign a petition to help protect the poor women in porn. And me being the person that I am, I was like, tell me more about these poor women in porn that need to be protected. And so they just sort of vomited out a lot of really fear-based, scary tactics. And like, you have to sign this petition because performers are abused, and all the, and I'm like, the average person is going to say, yes, I definitely want to protect people. Here, I'm going to sign that petition. And that's a great example. And that was done by a nonprofit organization that is worldwide, but that is centered here in LA, that consistently wreaks havoc on the adult industry.
Mm.
And people just don't understand how manipulative politics can be, especially when you're concerning the rights of sex workers, because we're a marginalized community.
Right.
So that's my short answer for right now.
Okay.
It's Jessa here, just taking a quick break. Thanks for listening. Are you interested in being a guest on the show? I'm always looking for people with expertise to share that could enrich other people's sex lives. And I'm also interested in hearing from people who have transformed their own intimate relationship and would want to share their story with my listeners. So if you've got something to contribute to the discussion and want to see about being featured on an upcoming episode, please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, and check out the Be a Guest details. You'll find everything you need there.
Talk to me a little bit about where you see the intersection of porn and education, or sex education, because it's not generally where I suggest people learn about sex, but I think it can also be helpful. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think that is, it's a subject that has a lot of different layers. First, I don't think it is in any way the industry's responsibility to educate people.
Right.
That being said, I think that with such a lack of great sex education and the reluctance that many parents have to discuss sex in a relevant manner with their kids, I think that we do have this gap that porn is inadvertently filling when it comes to sex ed. And I think that, when we see something on camera and we don't have the information in our brains to really process it, we might emulate it and expect the same results. So part of the reason that I chose to be certified as an educator and create the series in the manner that I did is because, first of all, the series is not porn. It is hardcore. It is explicit.
Yeah.
But I definitely try to explain to people that this isn't the same as watching porn. So each volume of the series, and they all follow the same formula, starts out with my narration. And from there, we go to some performer interviews, and the participants always have real life experience in whatever topic we're covering for that part of the series. And then following the interviews, we do hardcore demonstrations about the topic at hand. And the hardcore demonstrations are overlaid with my narration. So when the viewer is seeing maybe the steps to have anal sex, or when we're talking about BDSM for beginners or senior sex, which is my latest educational, they are seeing things in action. They are receiving more information that's educational at the same time. Following the hardcore demonstrations, there is more of my narration throughout. And then at the end of each project, there are 3 hardcore sex scenes in most. Senior sex has 2, but most have 3 that you can choose to watch either with or without my narration. And the reason that this was so important to me is because I wanted viewers to to not only be educated, but then also sort of tie everything in together and leave them with a scene, if you will, a sex scene that showcased what they had just learned. And so in the scenes that I do for the educationals, as opposed to my regular movies, vignettes, features, whatever, I do integrate putting on condoms. You can see the use of lube. You see clitoral stimulation. You see more orgasms that are actually happening. You see less posed positions. You see less linear sex, because a lot of the time in adult movies, sex is very, very linear. And
Right.
when we think of a sex scene in an adult movie, we're generally thinking of PIV sex, which is penis and vagina sex. So in the series, I really try to emphasize intimacy over penetration and information over fantasy.
Yeah.
And this series has been so well received throughout these years that I think initially people were watching them because my name as a performer is fairly known. And so I have a pretty broad fan base. But especially in the past 5 years, I've definitely reached the point where I've been legitimized as an educator. And it's sorry that it had to happen that way. It's sort of messed up because initially people were like, a porn star, like, what does she know? And then I really fought hard to fight that stigma of adult performers not being educated, not being knowledgeable.
Right.
And it was definitely at times it was definitely an uphill process, but I went on to be involved with a lot of the sexuality conferences. I was doing Catalyst. We're on a break right now with Catalyst, but I was doing Catalyst. I've been a keynote speaker. I've been a presenter at many, many Catalyst conferences. I'm very active with Woodhull. Last year, we screened senior sex at Woodhull. I have been a member of AASECT for 6 years, although if the requirements are always the same, I'll never be an AASECT certified educator.
Yeah.
And that's too bad.
There are some conversations going on about how to expand that, but yeah.
I have some friends on the board. There's a new president, which is definitely making us all very hopeful to make the conference more accessible to many people, as well as being AASECT certified. I presented at AASECT last year. I'm teaching a pre-con workshop this year at AASECT, and Joan and I are also doing one of the plenaries at AASECT this year, as well as Woodhull. So, those are all things that I've done separate from my work as an adult performer that have sort of legitimized me. I guess you have to put it that way, in the educational area. But for me, my goal is just to keep going and provide this knowledge to as many people as possible. And I really do think that at the end of the day, we all just want to be comfortable with ourselves and our bodies. We all just want to know that we're okay. And I don't like using this word,
I saw the air quotes.
Normal. That's what so many people come to me at events or universities, or will write to me and they say something like, I've never done fill in the blank. And it could be had an orgasm with my partner, or they'll say something like, I'm into this type of sex. And they're waiting for my reaction. I love holding space for them and just assuring them that they're, quote, normal, whatever normal is. So I spend a lot of my time doing that and involving myself in new projects that I think serve groups of people who have been neglected by sex education. And that's how Senior Sex came about.
Yeah. So it sounds like the video series, you're consciously trying to show some of the stuff that it doesn't get, it's behind the scenes in pornography, right?
Yeah.
The lube, the nonlinear nature of this, the consent, whatever's happening, right? Like, let's round out that because porn is fantasy. So it's nice that you're getting to the realities of things as well as the instruction.
Yeah. And, I also think it's super important that we don't discount the fact that some porn is supernatural. Some porn, depending on, especially if it's some of the indie film companies, Pink and White is a great example of porn that is shot outside of that like mainstream traditional porn lens. They don't showcase linear sex. They showcase folks of all genders, all body types. So, I mean, I think in this discussion, it's really important for us to not be like, all porn is this, but the propensity is, yes, to be a polished, finished version. And a lot of people don't realize that sometimes the reason that you don't see lube in porn is because who knows who's okay with having what brand appear where. So for us, it's awesome because when I shoot for Wicked Pictures, Wicked Sensual Care is our line of lube. So it's not a problem to have that in the shot, but we cannot show any brand names in the adult industry. So that's something that a lot of people don't think about.
Right. Yeah. No, I would not have thought about that at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are some of the, you mentioned some of the titles. I don't know if you know them all off the top of your head. Like what's the variety of things that you have produced and put out there?
Yeah. So first I did Fellatio when the series was just like a twinkle in my eye. I had gone to Wicked and I said, I think I want to do a line of educational movies for people. And they go, okay, so try one and we'll see how it does. No pressure. Right. So I shot Fellatio first and it did really well. And it was so scary for me because I just wanted it to be good. And I had directed features, but obviously never an educational product. So Fellatio came first. After Fellatio, it was Positions. After that, I did Anal. Female Masturbation was next. I did Anal Play for Men, Woman to Woman, Satisfier Like a Legend, Foreplay, BDSM for Beginners, Kama Sutra, G-Spot and Female Ejaculation, Plus Size Sex, and most recently, Senior Sex. I feel like I may have missed one in there, but I think there are 15 of them. The ones that are really standout titles for me, and of course, I would not gender it if I had to do it over again, was when I did Anal Play for Men. And Anal Play for Men was one of those where we didn't know how great it would do in a retail space because there's still a lot of stigma around prostate play. Yeah. But what we found is that online and on VOD, it was doing very, very well. And it continues to sell as the stigma is lessened. It continues to sell really well. G-Spot and Female Ejaculation, again, would not have said female ejaculation. But doing just the topic of squirting, because so many people have so many questions about it. That's a massive seller. Of course, anal, because anal is very trendy. Kama Sutra does really well because I took 25 of the most popular Kama Sutra positions and I explained them in a way and demonstrated them in a way that was more accessible maybe to people. Plus Size Sex was very successful. For Plus Size Sex, it was the first time I had collaborated with someone else. And it was definitely a different type of experience. And I think initially people didn't understand the educational benefit for me shooting a movie like that. And because most of the porn that we see of people of size, it is condescending. It isn't done tastefully. The titles are really bad. So I wanted to provide people of size with a sexual resource that would enable them to think, oh, here, something is just for me. And I look around at every workshop that I teach or every place that I lecture, every group of people that I coach, and I see all different body types. So why aren't we representing that? And so in Plus Size Sex, we did things like communication exercises with our partners about how we like different parts of our body talked about and worshipped and appreciated. We did full body massage. We did the communication exercises are probably some of my favorites, but we also did an exercise where we practiced different positioning in couples where either both people are of size or one person is of size and the other person isn't. and the physical constraints that might put
Right.
on people. And so I think when plus size sex came out, it really got the attention refocused on what is the purpose of this
Yeah.
series. And people really started paying attention to the message that I was trying to get across at that point. So that was probably the turning point. And for me, senior sex has also been a very pivotal part of the series because I met Joan Price 5+ years ago at a conference. And when I met her, we bonded instantly, and I knew that I wanted to collaborate with her.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know what that was going to look like. But at the same time, I was also doing a lot of retail and distributor trainings for Wicked Pictures and Wicked Sensual Care. And I'm constantly looking for feedback for the educationals. So I was speaking in many retail spaces, and I was asking people, what topics do you think that your customers and clients would benefit from? And sex and aging kept coming up time and time again. And I thought, how do I do this and reach a group of people who don't have any real sexual health resources, who also are maybe coming from generations, like we were lacking sex education growing up. Back then, people didn't even talk about it.
Right.
So like the most basic sex education was overlooked. And so I started talking to Joan about it because obviously that's her area of expertise. And she has been teaching senior sex, I think, for about 15 years now. And when I first started to talk to her about it, she was a little reluctant because she didn't know if her fan base would be receptive to the idea of an explicit medium to learn about senior sex. And so over the years, we continued to talk about it, and we occupied the same spaces at conferences, and we just got closer and closer to one another. And I said, would you be willing to ask your followers? And so she did. And I knew they would be receptive.
Obviously, they said yes.
Yeah, but I just needed her to be comfortable with it because Joan is very experienced and very open. But this is an area that she really didn't have a lot of experience in. So we started to create senior sex together. I write all of the scripts. So this was also a bit of a challenge for me to hand over some of that control. Yeah. I gave her some sample scripts from my other educationals that I had written, and I explained to her the formula. And I said, well, why don't we do this? I would like for you to write it, be the writer, co-direct it, co-create it with me. And I said, and I was almost like, sort of warning her. I said, the difficulty will be in the casting. Oh. I'm always so incredibly thoughtful with the casting in each educational, but I knew that this one would be challenging. So Joan set about writing the script, and I mean, she's already a super successful author. I read all of Joan's stuff. I'm her biggest fan. So she's wonderful at conveying her message through her words. And I had a little hesitation and reluctance when we began the shoot because it's always been all me with the exception of plus size sex. So I know my camera ability and I know how to allow time for it. And I'm really hard on myself on camera too. And I didn't know about how directing Joan would be, but she is just so phenomenal. And she was so great and so natural on set with a teleprompter that I was just mind blown. But the casting for us was definitely an issue. I wanted to be very inclusive. My goal was to have a couple that had a rapport, that had been together, that had that familiarity. But it was also very important for me to showcase in this movie. Now we have hookup culture, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that we have folks that are getting a bit older who have lost their partner through divorce or through death, and who are maybe experiencing a new relationship for the first time. it was also very important to me to include kink, because I think that seniors don't have a lot of options when it comes to exploring their sexuality, if they're kinky, or where are their resources coming from, or how likely are they to ask questions about it, So we initially had 3 couples, and something that I have to address as a white woman, as someone who has a tremendous amount of privilege navigating this world, we set out to find people of color to be in senior sex. And initially we had a couple, and maybe a week or 2 before, radio silence. They didn't get back to us and say no, they just stopped getting back to us. And so we rushed to find anyone else, and I found a woman of color that was going to do the interviews on her own, and then maybe do some nudity, maybe a solo masturbation scene. And the day before, she said, I can't do this. I'm afraid of what my family's going to say. I'm afraid of what my children are going to say. And we don't have any people of color in senior sex. And I think it is the one thing that the movie is lacking moving forward. And, we put out casting calls far and wide. We were working with other educators of color. We were talking at conferences, asking for referrals and trying to get help. And there's no good excuse. There's no good excuse. Right. There is no reason. And we are also talking about doing a sequel to Senior Sex, and that will very obviously be our priority before we cast anyone else. Will be to cast people of color, because I really want everyone watching Senior Sex to feel like it's relatable. So it's important to me that everyone's represented. The sex scenes in Senior Sex are some of the most amazing, unique, genuine scenes or expressions of sexuality, for that matter, that I have ever witnessed. Joel and Bonnie are phenomenal human beings, and I've spent time with them after we did the project, and I've learned so much from them. And they have really given this project a depth that I don't know that I expected for walking into it. And Galen and Marlene were our hookup couple. And I was really scared. I put them in touch with each other. They had a familiarity. They were communicating what they were okay with. But we were so nervous, but it was just so amazing. And at XBiz, it won Best Movie. And at AVN, just a few weeks ago, Joan and I won Best Director for the project. So
congratulations!
Thank you. And we're like I said, we're going to screen it at AASECT, which I think is a really big deal. And it is. I think it's very timely, because I'm noticing the media starting to talk about sex and aging in an open way that they weren't really doing before. And even the theme of AASECT this year, sexuality all throughout our lives.
Right.
It's just really great. And it's taught me a lot. And Joan says we are all seniors in training. And I love that.
Yeah. Some of us with more training than others, but yes.
True. But yeah, I think we fight that stigma, that idea that society and media constantly feeds us about, you can't be sexy when you're older. Wrinkles are bad and wrong. Sex has an expiration date. When we talk about older people having sex, it's generally ew, ooh, gross, and I can't even count the number of times that I was super excited telling people about senior sex and they cringed. And I called them out on it. I'd be like, oh, see what you just did? See the reaction that you just had there?
It's certainly part of the training I have to become AASECT certified as a sex therapist, right? Is to watch some of that and we had to expand our awareness about sexuality in general. And I say to people all the time, as a sex therapist, my youngest clients have been about 21 and my oldest have been 80. And isn't that great news? I
Yes.
think we all would like to think we're going to be sexual all the way to, to the very end. But
I mean, I would definitely like to think that.
yeah,
And so I'm glad that you brought that up about the part of your curriculum and your training being to watch educational things. That is absolutely my experience as well. And I did so many SARs where I was looking at such horrible, outdated resources
yeah,
that they were especially lacking in, not so much currently, but when I started as an educator, LGBTQIA, specifically the lack of queer resources really bothered me. The lack of resources for differently abled bodies
yeah,
made me really angry. So it upsets me. And the same thing with sex and aging. I watched some resources that they have had in SARS over the years, and they just don't have anything that's really relevant to today's seniors.
yeah, yeah.
And when I get frustrated about stuff like that, it makes me want to take action and do something about it. So, I mean, that's what got
Right,
plus
right.
size sex happening. That's what got senior sex happening. And one of the titles that I'm focusing on for the upcoming year is sex and disability.
I was going to ask, is that
Yeah.
going to be coming down the pike? Because that would be amazing. Yeah, really needed.
Yes. And I want to involve as many people as possible in creating this, because there are just so many considerations when we talk about including differently abled bodies in discussions about sexual health and wellness and autonomy, and all types of rights. I think it's such a broad conversation that I am so nervous, because I want to do it justice. And much like my collaboration with Joan on senior sex, I couldn't have done senior sex without Joan. I knew she was the person to do it with me. And I want many people to be involved in an educational about sex and disability. So right now I'm in the planning stages. Sex toys and pleasure products is also another educational that I've been working on now for years. So we'll see what happens, but senior sex too,
Right.
Sex and disability and sex toys and pleasure products are all on the horizon.
Great. So where do people find these resources? Where do people go if they're intrigued by some of these educational products?
Yes. So my guide, Jessica Drake's Guide to Wicked Sex, can be found in all adult stores, not just here in the US, but all across the world. You can also get more information and buy them online if you go to guidetowickedsex.com. They are also available for viewing on wicked.com, but I would just hope that people understand wicked.com is a place where all of my hardcore product lives.
So not just the educational ones, but the
right.
Yeah.
Right. So you will see Wicked's vast library of porn for entertainment. My educationals also have a separate section on wicked.com. And wicked.com is a subscription site. So you pay monthly to be a member and you can watch whatever to your heart's content. In some areas, the guides are available on hospitality networks. So they're in hotels. You can also find them online. VOD, so video on demand. You can purchase the parts of them that you want to see or the topics that you want to see. And I think social media is super, super helpful when we're talking about continuing the conversation. So on Twitter, I am the Jessica Drake, and on Instagram, I'm Jessica Drake. And there you can find my whereabouts, because if I'm on the road doing workshops, whether in a private venue or in a retail space, you can come and see me, ask me questions in person, be a part of the workshop. And I can also refer you to educationals. I can be your personal lube shopper when it comes to the Wicked Sensual Care collection. And that's the other thing too that we're doing throughout all of the educationals is we're also fighting a massive stigma surrounding lube use.
Yeah.
Because so many people think that they have problems if they want to use lube or need to use lube. Or maybe they think that, oh, lube is just for old people or people who are going through menopause. And those things are true as well. Everyone can benefit from it. But I try to integrate that message throughout the series and throughout my workshops as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, people could reach out to me online, or they can come and see me doing an event. Or I think podcasts like this are a great way to spread information and familiarize people, not just with the brand, but with me in general, and, and just create a bigger conversation about sexuality. So I'm super grateful that you do what you do. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah. Thank you for being on. I will put all your handles and the links and stuff in the show notes too, so people can access that easily. So thank you again for your time and being on the show.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We'll talk soon. Bye.
All right.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question and answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.